Welcome. I am so excited to be here today to talk about 5 advanced strategies for maximizing your results from structured data. My name is Martha Van Berkel, and I'm the CEO of Schema App. I like to introduce myself with a knowledge graph. And you might say, like, Martha, we've seen this. Like, why do you do this? Well, it's because it actually explains how I'm connected to other things in the world and on the web. And this connectedness or semantic knowledge graph is exactly what Google uses in order to answer questions. And so if you're wondering, how I'm connected to Kevin Bacon, you can kind of crawl my knowledge graph and see that he used to drive my car. Or if you wonder why I say the word A all the time or spell things with a U, you can look at and understand my knowledge graph that that's because I'm Canadian. You may also then be like, why does Martha love nerding out on structured data? And you can see that, I come by it honestly because I have an engineering degree and I also studied strategy and innovation at MIT. So this knowledge graphs helps answer questions about how I'm connected to other things in the world. Today, we're going to talk about structured data. And specifically, I want you to just like reflect on how the search engine result page has changed over the years. There's so many colors on this example, but also just know that it isn't just Google controlling this, that Google isn't just in charge, that you are empowered to actually stand out in search and pick ways that you can show up. And that's really what we're going to talk about today, about how you can take control of how your brand is showing up by fully leveraging structured data. Now, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, structured data is an SEO strategy that helps your content be fully understood and stand out in search with those rich results. And I'll interchange structured data with schema markup throughout this presentation. And I often use schema markup because it's actually more specific, which is funny because like we're using this to be explicit to explain exactly what our pages are talking about. Now, I talked about taking control. And this is the really exciting part. And I have the number 32 plus on here because it's not just the rich features or rich results that exist today, but they're also expanding. And it really allows you to expand that real estate. And I often talk to brand or digital leaders and talk about, like your users and your future customers are starting the experience on the web. Why not put your best foot forward and make sure that that first experience, that first way that they're interacting is as robust and informative as possible. And that's what we're going to use and talk about with rich results. Now, just to kind of get your brain going, make sure that we're all kind of thinking about all the opportunities for our brand, let's cover a couple of the most common ones. So, videos is a great way. How do you make sure things are just popping up and they can click and take action right away? How to's another great example. And how to is very interesting because when it was first announced at Google I/O in 2019, it was primarily on mobile. And we've seen recently, without an announcement from Google, that it's actually showing up now on desktop. And I love this because it becomes even more relevant for how to's for complicated topics that perhaps the enterprise is trying to answer. In this example, SAP is talking about their Fiori app, and it's long steps that you have to follow, not like a recipe. FAQ, one of my favorites. And I know that there's often debate on, is FAQ just, driving people to get the answers right away? I always think about it as like, how do you delight your customers? How do you make sure that those first questions you're answering are the ones that are going to enable their experience or have them dig deeper? And I also, I grew up at Cisco in services. And so I love FAQ also as a way to bring, that customer success or that service element right to the forefront of the experience. FAQ is also really great for other topics that perhaps, like if your enterprise, here is our example where it's our enterprise software for doing schema markup at scale. I don't want to put my price on here. And so this is a great way to, again, answer some of those initial questions that people have when our first calls or our first demos right in the search result, but still gain sort of more of that search real estate. Product, very common. I'm going to talk a little bit about how the product rich result is evolving. there's so much cool stuff going on around product rich results. So we'll dig into that, but just know again that there's kind of flexibility and lots of different offers. I don't have shipping in here, but we'll talk about that a little later. And so all of these ways to stand out allow you to manage the brand across channels. And the strategist in me likes thinking of just not, mobile and desktop search where I just showed you the visuals, but also how that understanding is helping you show up in voice search and eventually also on other surfaces. And this was again sort of when Google was talking about, why they do structured data, it was this much bigger picture that they really articulated, stand out in search, be understood on voice assistants, and also discovery on surfaces. And that you don't have to do lots of different things. You just have to do structured data to be then relevant and found across these different platforms. So I mentioned already a little bit of a hint of what I'm going to talk about here around Google's direction for structured data. But this is my business. This is what we do at Schema App every day, all day. And so it's in my best interest to make sure that I understand, is this still at the forefront? Is this area of search still accelerating? And the short answer is yes. Recently, we looked at all the updates to documentation. So there's actually a location that you can see like anytime Google makes a change to the documentation. And we used to actually scrape the sites to make sure we understood what this was. Now they document it and they show about 4 months back. Over the last year, 52% of the documentation updates were with regards to structured data. 52%. Think of like everything that's documented in there. So really, really big kind of lean in from Google, continuing to focus here. We also saw a ton of schema.org releases. Now, schema.org is the vocabulary that structured data uses in order to articulate what pages are about. And it was released in 2011. So since 2012 to 2019, there were 16 releases of schema.org. In the last year, 12. So if that isn't sort of hard evidence that we're seeing acceleration, I don't know what is. And what's even most exciting is that we're seeing different areas of Google participate in these releases. Now, we were hoping in April, but it came in early May. We also have seen Google partner across the schema.org open community to create a new validator. So for those of you that are fans of the structured data testing tool like me, this is great news because this validator allows us to see sort of how the nesting and I'll say more advanced structured data is showing up and that making sure that we're following all the rules of schema.org. Now, it doesn't tell us whether you have errors or warnings, but that's okay. We have the rich result test for that. But this new schema.org validator is out. They said they were going to do it. Again, Google, Dan Berkel, who is the representative for Google on schema.org, is heavily participating in this. And they're keeping more tools, allowing us to do more advanced markup, which is what we're getting to. Now, I want to just touch a little bit on product. This is, in addition to sort of COVID markup that they've done in order to help communicate changes, shopping and products has been the other like really key area that we've seen advancements in here. I get kind of excited. So there were new rich results announced over the last 6 months, one specifically around shipping, the second around price drop. And what's really interesting about price drop is that as long as you have product markup and offer properties, they actually figure out the price drop. And so this is again sort of them enhancing the experience with data, but you also then have to make sure that you have that offer information there over time so that you're eligible for this. And so this is again really exciting. And what's fun is that in the last release that came out in March, we also saw them talking about size enumeration. So enumerations, think of it as a drop down where you have like options to pick from. And so here they're now trying to be really specific around product sizes. Now my brain goes to, shipping. My brain goes to like, okay, well, I want to be really specific about what size of skirt or shoe or product, maybe a paddleboard that I'm looking for. So they're now elaborating sort of on how you can articulate that. Again, I think this plays also to specificity of search and making sure that people aren't getting to the category pages and navigating through, but instead getting what they need sort of with that initial search. In February, we also saw them, doing a whole big document on, providing better product information to shoppers, articulating again, whether you're a retailer or an online publisher, that you should be adopting structured data and that you should also be using these things called GTINs. So think of this as, a global identifier for how you tie things together. And I always like to go back to my introductory slide, here where we're talking about how are these things connected? Well, if everyone's talking about the same paddleboard, if that GTIN is on there, there's a way actually for Google to connect the dots. And then if they're trying to do price drop, they could then be like, oh, well, I also then know like what the prices are across the web, for that specific product. So again, a lean into specificity, a lean into being very articulate about what it is that you're talking about. There's also been some subtle updates, and I like this because it allows us to see that structured data isn't just used, by one team within Google, but a much broader team. So this is an excerpt off of the product documentation, and you can see beside price, there's this new little red box, and it says for Google Images. Okay, so hold on, Google Images and shopping, yes. So this is a great, very nuanced update that says, make sure the price is there so that you are eligible for the rich image viewer. So if you didn't think you were just saying, oh, I'm just going to try to get it through the desktop search, think again. It's also structured data is helping image search. Oh, I should almost have had a slide in here talking about how John Mueller was saying visual search was going to be a lean in. Boom, there's an example. The other thing that I look at to see sort of where things are going and why I'm, leaning in here a little bit around product and pricing is that I'm seeing pricing be a theme on a much larger scale. And so this is the conversation within schema.org GitHub. Okay, so if you want to get super nerdy, this is where you go to see who's talking about this stuff and who's proposing these changes. And so in this specific example, Alex Jensen's from Google Shopping, and he's talking about how he wants to implement price types. And the example he gives is around like delineating between one-time upfront payment or monthly installments or, a contract for a wireless subscription plan. And this isn't the only one. They've also talked about pricing categories. And I love this because there was an undocumented property called discount offer that we may have been using since 2017 with some of our clients. And this specifically now calls out that delineation between invoice price, list price, sale price. Big takeaway, big focus on pricing coming in. Also, that Google Shopping is very active within schema.org, sort of making those changes. All right. So let's switch gears now. I promised you 5 advanced structured data strategies. And so that's what we're going to do today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how rich results can inform content. And this kind of has you go think more about like your content teams, how you're architecting pages. Then we're going to talk about when you should try to use multi-type entities and why that's super helpful. We're going to talk about strong connectors, defining entities with Wikipedia, which kind of plays a little bit to that specificity whole theme that we're seeing. And then finally, really important E.A.T properties. So for the first time, I'm actually going to try to give you an example. So, in my life, if I have a goal that I'm setting or a result that I'm trying to achieve, I want to kind of visualize it and kind of see where it is. So what we're going to talk about is like, if this is the visual result that we're trying to get, and you're perhaps a hospital network, I'll give some examples around product within enterprise as well. How do we start thinking about how do we achieve this? Like, what are the steps we have to take in order to achieve this outcome? And so let's first start by rich results informing content. Now, I know it's boring and we all love going to Google documentation, but I do encourage you to spend a little bit of time looking at this list. So, this is in Google Search Console documentation for structured data. And what it lists on the left are all the different types of rich results. These are the ways that you can stand out. And why I highlight this is that we often think of just like, oh, well, I could get FAQ or I could get product or I could think about a how to. Do you remember my example? This is 2, right? This is your review snippet and your FAQ. So what I want you to do is when you're thinking about, like what is the outcome we're trying to get, like think broadly. And then we're also going to think about like how does this apply against the type of content that's on your site? And it really depends on the type of organization you are. If you are a hospital network, you might have physicians and already are seeing ratings, but you might also see that those aggregators are pushing the envelope and already doing FAQ. Or you might be, again, like an enterprise software company or a technology company, and you're like, well, I don't really want pricing. I want them to contact us to have that conversation. Then you might want to plan to make sure that you're still getting, that really great big real estate by looking at FAQ. Most importantly, though, when you decide what you're trying to achieve for those different types of content, look at the Google required and recommended properties, and then go and think about how you're going to architect that content to make sure that you have those. And the example I give here is with SAP, where they're thinking about how do we make sure that when we write content, we're not just writing it for our consumers, the people, but we're also writing it for the search engines, and so that we can just really nail getting that huge, rich result right from the beginning. And the results really speak for themselves, right? Like if you start doing this, you can continue to maximize anything that you publish, will have a rich result and be ready to go. The other way that I like to kind of call out this whole planful piece around like what is the outcome you want is if you're also going through a website change. So in this case, Advent Health was consolidating hundreds of websites into sort of one single brand under one sort of platform. And so we were helping them like think through, what are the different types of content that you have and which rich result do you want to try to get for those different types of pages? And if you actually plan it that way, you'll actually have the opportunity to get rich results on all your core content. And, that core content is written for a specific purpose to really help your users as well as get them to engage. So in our case of our example here, we want to try to get that review snippet as well as the FAQ. And so on this page that's talking about a physician, we're going to want to make sure that we have those required properties for that rating as well as for that FAQ page. All right, strong connectors. So this is an area that I'm super, super passionate about because it helps, again, tell the story. And the story is not just about, like one page, right? We're talking about specificity of example, but your business has lots of different aspects to it, and your business strategy also has different aspects to it. You may be like this part of our, SMB offer is what we're going to actually try to drive adoption for today. Or perhaps there's like one new product that you're launching that you want to make sure happens, but they're all connected. And so if you are using your structured data well, you can use strong connectors to make sure that Google understands how these things work together. Now, again, don't take my word for it as like, the expert in structured data. Take Google's word for it. So we always like to look at, what we've been recommending as a, expert in this area. And again, we have a semantic background. So it's sort of the language that we speak. But in July 2020, Google started, updating their documentation to also illustrate the importance of connectedness. And they talk about ad IDs, and think of ad IDs as sort of the way to connect nodes within the structured data. If you use Schema App, you don't have to worry about that. We take care of that even on the most advanced markup. But the key takeaway you have here, though, is that, the example they give is, if you're doing recipe markup, make sure to connect the video and the recipe so that we can show a video rich result or a recipe rich result. And so they're basically saying, give us options by helping us understand that these elements are connected. Now, connectedness is another key area that we're seeing, I'll say, like a lean in from the schema.org releases, and specifically in health. So, health, there's all kinds of really interesting things going on. But in the most recent release of schema.org that happened in March, they're actually talking about a new health related content. And we are in a global pandemic. And so there's a lot of content talking about procedures and side effects and treatments. And so they're actually calling out the ability with within health related content for you to say, like, what are those topics within it? And so, again, like connecting those topics within the content. And so this is, well, we get really excited because like this is actually like talking them about mentions, about, has part. Oh, wait, that's on my slide of really awesome connected structured data properties. Now you'd be saying, like, Martha, that's great, but I don't do structured data every day. How do I figure out how anything is connected? Good news. Schema App actually has a free tool out there because, back in 2014, 2015, when we were first doing this, guess what? That was our problem that we were trying to solve. And so we have a tool called Schema Paths. And you can find it in the footer of our website, or you can actually just Google Schema Paths and you'll find it. And what you can do here is talk about what things you want to relate. So in my example, I was trying to say, I want to get that FAQ page, and my page is about a physician. And then you can click on that find path. And what Schema Pass will do is give you all the ways that you can connect these two types of things. And you have to kind of read through and use your brain. So it's like, is it ownership funding? Is it knows about? So it really makes most sense that the physician is the subject of that FAQ page, right? The FAQ page is about, would be the opposite of the physician. But since the page is primarily about a physician, we would use that. And so, subject of is only one of the strong connectors that we absolutely love. About, mentions, subject of, has part, and knows about are some of those ones that you want to explore as a way to make sure that you connect it. And subject of is a great way because it's the opposite of about. And so if you're writing about a product page and there's an FAQ, that's another way, the product is the subject of the FAQ, and then you can beautifully nest that. And so, again, in our example, we're using one of those strong connectors, subject of, in order to make sure that we're saying that this FAQ page is about the physician. All right, we ready for number 3? Here we go. Here we go. All right, multi-type entities. So, multi-type entities is when you actually want to use two types within schema.org, basically so that you get all the properties in order to use and describe it. And there's some key specific areas that make sense to use this on. So, if a house is for sale, it's not just a single family residence. It's also a product. Or if you're helping a service business, you can actually say it's a service and a product. And I'll tell you a little bit why more we recommend that. Or, in the example that we're showing around a doctor, it's both a physician and a person. And you might be saying, like, Martha, why do I do this? Well, it's actually so that you can describe things with more specificity, so it's better understood, and that it can also, get you more clicks, right? Like that's what this is all about. And so in this example, it's a house for sale. You can see it's both a product and a single family residence. And now you can use all those product properties like offer, but in single family residence, I also want to describe it, right? Like the number of bedrooms. I want to, say what the floor size is, etc. And so this is just a great way to fully describe, what it is that the page is about. Now, multi-type entities are a little bit more complicated. Again, this is a place where Schema App can help you out. It's something that we do, and our tools are really built to help you do. Now, service schema markup is one that, I guess we've been journeying on since, again, we started very early on. But service and product is our I'll say most recent recommendation if you're marking up services content. And the reason is because we want to be able to talk about who's the provider of the service and be able to link that to an organization. So in this case, we were talking about a haircut and how we can kind of nest that local business, tie back to sort of who that haircut delivery person is or provider is. And then the second is around the product. Well, there's a cost to the service. So how do we do that? The other reason we love this is it also means that you can try to get product rich results for that service. And the reason we changed what we were recommending is the documentation in schema.org got updated, and it was very nuanced. So instead of it now saying just product, an offered product, it said an offered product or service. And while there is services schema markup, by doing that multi-type entity, you're able to really call out that whole picture around the service that you're offering. And this is really the power of a multi-type entity. Now, in our example, I talked about, it's a physician, but it's actually also a person. And since we're talking, we want to, explain fully who Thomas is, we're going to want to use some of those attributes within person. And so you can see on the left, I want to use out of physician medical specialty. Makes sense, really specific. But on the right-hand side, under person, I want to talk about his affiliations. I want to talk about where he's an alumni of. Because if someone's looking specifically for a doctor that has specialty or training from a specific school, that allows us to make sure that we're connecting those dots. Let's connect them properly. Specificity and entities. I think we could almost play a game around how many times does Martha say specificity in this presentation? So let's dig into this piece. This is where I want to use other definitions on the web to help explain what you're talking about. And you may ask, like, well, why do you want to do this? Well, the fact is with Wikipedia, like they've already defined and Google knows what these things are. And so why not use them to help explain your content more specifically? And again, this is where we're going to use those strong connectors that I talked about previously. In this example, it's a case study, right? So many of us have case studies. This is how we helped SAP achieve unprecedented results by partnering with us and their agency acronym. And so here I can actually say that it mentions, and then here I'm using a Wikidata entry. And you can notice the Q there. And the difference between Wikidata and Wikipedia is Wikidata is sort of, not in languages or so forth. It's just like that is the entity. And so here I'm saying, this is an article that mentions this specific entity. And so if people are looking for case studies about SAP, we are being absolutely specific about that. The other angle you can take around specificity in entities is to use those really specific properties in order to explain in more detail. So I love with physician, medical specialty is a really, articulate, specific thing that we want to call out. And then boom, bada bing, let's mix those two things together. You can use the really specific properties. Again, making sure you're using all the ones required by, using that tool of multi-type entities when you need it. And you can also use that Wikipedia, Wikidata definitions to make sure you're being absolutely clear as to what it's about. All right, everyone's still with me? We're going to talk about E.A.T. Let's dig in. So with E.A.T, there's specific strong E.A.T properties. And really, these work best if what you're connecting them to or referring to is also really well defined. But reviewed by is a really great one. Alumni of, same as, author and publisher. Now, author and publisher, I think, are very commonly used. Make sure that those are then tied to a page that is describing that author and sort of what are their credentials. But reviewed by, I think, is really, really relevant, especially these days with regards to health-related content. And then I love same as and alumni of, like same as is a very direct, this is exactly the same as. And so reviewed by is available under web page. And so if you're using web page, in this case, we use the example here of medical web page, you can use that reviewed by, and then again, that organization and person you want to make sure is really defined in detail. We also like, if you're defining a person or, maybe this is the person that's reviewing it, that again, you're being very deliberate as to like, what are their credentials, right? Why are they an expert? Why do they deserve that expertise kind of call out in the search result in E.A.T. And there's, many different ways. Again, the reason I shared the multi-type entities and so forth is there's lots of ways that you can interconnect these things. And then again, use Wikipedia to make sure that you're being clear on how these things are defined. And so again, in our case of our physician and person page, we can use alumni of as a way to making sure that they understand, what is not just that medical specialty, but what is exactly, where did he study in order to articulate his expertise. Now, I wouldn't be sort of, I wouldn't be the CEO of Schema App if I didn't also talk about just the fact that, like, yes, Martha, this is all interesting and helps us sort of be clear with Google and stand out in search and, bring beautiful results. But it's also all about the business, right? So there's a clear return on investment from doing schema markup. And it starts at, getting that visibility and standing out to then getting the click, but then sort of really inserts all of that traffic into your funnel to help you drive to that outcome that you're trying to get as your digital team. And, I really loved, this example with Henry Ford. When Julie was talking about, like her goal as a center of excellence within Henry Ford was to show value to the physicians and how, she was helping them drive bookings in order to fill their calendars and drive revenue. And so what she said is, she was able to tell the story about how structured data was giving them visibility in the markup by showing the rich results that she was able to achieve there. And through our partnership, we're able to help her see sort of how the strategy of how she has to think about this content and how she can motivate those physicians to fill out that information in order to get to that result. And so at Schema App, we're all about the end-to-end experience, starting with strategy and kind of helping you, make sure that there's no barrier with IT, that we can just do these advanced strategies that I shared today easily, sort of with our tools, but also partnered with our customer success. This is a complicated area of search, but because we do it every day, it's something that we're both passionate about and something that we love teaching you about. But most importantly, we stand behind the fact that, we can show you the hard results that come as a result of doing this. I'm honored that customers around the world and big brands choose to work with us to both understand how they maximize how they stand out at search, but also, work with us on strategy. In a recent conversation with one of our customers, I asked, like when you bought from us, like you were buying the tech and our managed services, but like what else did you get? And what she said was, where I thought I was buying, SEO strategy. In fact, I was really getting more content strategy to help us understand how we start thinking and planning our content. My name is Martha Van Berkel. I am super passionate about structured data. I am the CEO of Schema App, and thank you so much for joining today. Please reach out to me on my email, on Twitter, or connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear, what this prompted in your brain as to sort of where you're going to go next with structured data. Now, note that there is also Dig Deeper, lots of resources there. We have some white papers, some documentation on ROI to really help you make sure that you can maximize this journey.